another series of work which is this book represents, and we're hoping to have these here this spring maybe. So check out the Bergdorf windows if you're there, because they're great. And her work is, her photographs are in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art, the Victorian Albert, the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, among many others, but just to name a few. So I won't bore you with me anymore, and I'll pass it on to Bastienne, but this should be a conversation, so feel free to interject and ask questions. And
well, thank you so much for introducing me, and thank you so much for organizing all of this. Well, this series is called Topos, and Topos derives from the Greek word means place. And in my case, it was like the idea of trying to recreate a place, because I lived in so many different places and it was kind of a specific place or country, and I felt I wanted to make up my own places. So I became interested in the function of maps, and then I started creating my own maps. In this case, this is called Blue Subway Topos, and I was interested in the intricacies of like a subway mapping system. So what I usually start out with is this kind of a color palette. I knew I wanted to work with the blue and white tones, and then it's the idea that you create like a certain shape, but then you also play with the idea of chance. You let things drip, then you let it dry, then you add another layer. I work with the process of layering, and very often in the context of paper. So I use very thin tissue paper and tracing paper, and I glue with acid-free glue these different strips on it, and after which I still kind of let the paint drip upon it. So it's usually a pretty labor-intensive process, although it doesn't really exactly show, but it implies that you really have to go through the steps of letting it dry and then reapplying it. And so the idea of place is, I think we always search for this kind of place, and we are very defined by, of course, the culture we come from, the country we want to, but then on the other hand, there's also this kind of like imaginary place or mapping, which is like dream maps or mind maps. So let's just go to the other side. So this is part of this series. It's I created about 50 works of paper, approximately 40 inches by 90 inches. And the idea is to work with a specific pattern, so this could be a mountain or could be also something else. You can read into it. And I create these kind of outlines on wooden blocks, and then I make monotypes on transparent paper, which I cut out, and then I kind of rearrange them freely after I create this kind of surface. And the surface, because I grew up in Greece and Italy and lived here for so many years, I'm very attached to the idea of the water, the colors of the water, the texture of the water, and the spirituality of it. And another source of influence is Japanese woodcut prints like the Hokusai and Hiroshige. And there was one particular map of the Hiroshige which was called Mapping of Japan. And it looked kind of a bird's eye perspective of Japan. We saw all these different mountains and naming of places. So I kind of use sometimes like a kind of cultural concept or idea, and then I kind of run with it. And something totally else will come out of it, but I really love the kind of separation of colors and the concept of taking a place and making it totally your own. And that also came into my Homesteads project. If you open like the front of the book, there's actually a map. It's a Japanese map, but I used all the names of places instead of with household names. It says like Homesteads, housewife, home life, homeland security, home invasion, homegirl, homeboy. So I think this kind of notion of culture and popular culture is always kind of like another layer in my work. And these actually, I work also a lot with household items. So I save papers, or I save like little pieces of string, and then I make an imprint of the string. Or sometimes I collect old soaps and we photograph them and we arrange it. The idea is like this kind of Zen movement that you identify an object that might be very humble, but if you kind of regroup it, see it in a different way, it really gains in purpose and importance. Snow-covered mountain. And also other Asian influences is kind of the fabric that I choose. So you see that that's actually 50s flower fabric, and I quilt my own kind of pieces of fabric together first, and then I glue them onto the canvas, and then there are different layers of tracing paper on top of it. So again, it's like a multi-layered process. So feel free if you have any questions about technique or content or anything that comes on. So these little ones, these are little excerpts of kind of potential maps or so. Again, the first map actually I kind of had was a map of Tokyo, and I started kind of like looking at the intricacy of how a city really grows, and I started copying something, but then it became something much more free-flowing. It was more the idea that you had patterns and things that are very close together, and then that moved aside and moved apart. There was more space and less space. And here actually the underpinning was like a map of the world, which is traced in very fine ink pen. And then on top of that are these kind of circle movements and kind of brush strokes. But this ones I put as an underground, again, fabrics. I work a lot with fabrics on one hand because I'm drawn to these kind of quintessential female materials, and because I think it speaks to a culture of what women had been doing their whole life long, which was originally weaving, but also to have this kind of tactility of the fabric, which I love, and the sense of patterns and repetition of the pattern, but also breaking at the same time. Then I cut out these kind of yellow circles out of tracing paper and put some ink dots on top of it. This is a very similar idea that I use like the part of the map, and then sometimes with some of these pieces you have to go actually very close because they appear very differently when you look them from far away and close. So in this case, these smaller ones are much more intimate than the big ones. The big ones are kind of a bigger brush stroke, a bigger pattern. Like with this one, the orange toppers, there are actually two sources of inspiration. One is this is actually a joinery that was done by a very old friend of mine, an old lady in Greece where I have a house on the islands. And I always saw the women like they would spend their whole free time just making doilies and incredible, beautiful things. So one day I just decided to incorporate into my paintings, and I actually also used it for my photography. And for the photography, I used it if you have a chance to take a look at the book. The second part of the book is film stills, and what I photographed is I photographed existing films with women roles, but the women you cannot really see their faces. They're kind of like either half cut off or photographed through doilies or fabrics. So again, you see like kind of the touch of a certain female quality, but also you have a sense how popular culture treats in a way, like women's doing a lot of times, like textile things have been totally neglected or not really paid enough attention to, or were considered secondary art, like happening now. These were scarves, silk scarves of the 50s, which I also collect. I'm a big collector of things. It's kind of like in my mind, my father was an archaeologist, so the way I usually work, I collect for many years certain objects or certain things, and then I pull them together when I need them, which of course drives my husband crazy. I think I'm a good basement.
Was there a change in a mindset because this palette is brighter?
Yeah, I mean,
blues.
usually I'm very drawn to blues, but once in a while, I mean, I love strong colors. So my national gravity is probably the blue, green, watercolor. But if you would come to my studio, it's not the only painting that deals with color. So, but that was kind of on purpose, like this kind of really strong splash of color. And again, the underpinning is a totally flat orange, but on top of it is this canary orange-like kind of tracing paper. So you get like the texture through the paper itself. And this again was a cut out from the fabric. Okay, let's just go to... With this one, there's definitely also a Japanese influence. It's one of these series of Japanese fabrics that I collected. But it's not just the fabric, but also like, then again, it's like the overlaying of tracing paper with the fabric. Another thing, I always invite people to touch my art. I mean, probably you're not supposed to, but it's out of two reasons. I mean, one is like museums art, of course, is not supposed to be touched. But again, I was talking about this kind of process of feeling an object, a textile, like with women's art. So I find it's kind of actually important to get a sense of the feel. And in this case, it feels very different than an oil painting because it's a very smooth surface, but then once in a while it's like a wrinkle, which is a wrinkle of the paper when I glued it upon to create like a certain type of texture. So here the surface underneath was this kind of light blue, and then there were really 7, 8 layers of different paint strokes that I applied in tracing paper and glued them separately onto it. And then another element that I used is the actual physical strings instead of the imprint of the strings. And you can also like feel them underneath it. And then underneath are also the fabrics, these kind of flowered fabrics that I drew upon. So this is a little side project because the exhibition's name is Topos, and this is a series called Vessels. It's a typology of vessels, and I've probably created like so far 50 or 60 of them. And again, I'm kind of obsessed with seeing everything in like a huge series, and just that the eye can wander back and forth and compare shapes of silhouettes. I mean, the silhouette, what I love about the idea of the silhouette, that's a simplification of the outside and the inside space, and it's kind of very soothing to, I mean, for example, Victorian paper cuts are also very important in terms of female artistic tradition. And the idea that something changes slowly over a period of time. So if you want to look through the box, there are definitely a few more of those there. And these are watercolors. I work with this ones in a kind of technique that I invented myself again, art domestic materials. I use very strong espresso coffee, and I work very wet, and I let espresso coffee and pigment drop in particular areas because I'm interested in these surfaces meeting in 2 different areas and creating these kind of ambiguous kind of spaces. These are actually hand-painted paper, and then I cut them out, so it's kind of a negative and a positive of a kind of spatial arrangement, which is similar to these kind of like topographies. And there are also some more in the 2 boxes.
Do you, Bastienne, I mean, I don't know how Still's photograph project was finished in 2010, but do you kind of always work in photography at the same time as working?
Yes, actually I do, and I'm one of these people, it takes me actually quite a long time to finish a project, but probably because I'm pretty obsessive, so for me, something to be done, it usually takes at least 5 years or so.